A $3,000 a week dream job just turned into a living nightmare. Welcome back to the Backseat Redditor. This is a story of sapphire light, silver serums, and a billionaire who refuses to let beauty die. Sit back, watch the Minecraft parkour, and let's enter the velvet trap. I was hired to archive a billionaire's secrets, but I became his next exhibit. The velvet trap. I've always believed that every house has a heartbeat. Some are steady and calm, like a sleeping grandmother. Others are frantic, like a trapped bird. But Blackwood Estate? It didn't have a heartbeat. It had a breath, a long, cold, rattling exhale that seemed to follow me from the moment the iron gates swung shut behind my beat-up sedan. My name is Elara. I'm a freelance archivist, a fancy term for someone who gets paid to dig through the dusty, dark secrets of the wealthy. I was hired by Julian Blackwood. If you live in the USA, you've heard the name. Tech wunderkind, billionaire recluse, the man who vanished from the public eye after his wife, the ethereal Isabella, disappeared 3 years ago. The job was simple: organize the private archives in his secluded Adirondack Lake house. $3,000 a week, room and board included. It sounded like a dream. But the moment Julian opened the massive oak door, I realized I had walked into a beautiful, dangerous nightmare. The first meeting. He didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a fallen angel. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal turtleneck that hugged a frame hardened by more than just gym hours. His eyes were the color of the lake in winter, a gray so sharp it felt like it could cut. "You're late, Elara," he said. His voice was a rich baritone that vibrated in my chest. "No hello. No nice to meet you. Just a command." The storm slowed me down, I replied, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "I'm a professional," I told myself. Don't look at his lips. Don't notice the way he's watching you like you're the first interesting thing he's seen in a century. "The storm is just getting started," he murmured, his gaze traveling from my boots to my eyes. He stepped back, gesturing me inside. The house was a masterpiece of glass and steel, perched on the edge of a cliff. It was serene, cinematic, and utterly suffocating. Every wall was a window, exposing the dark, thrashing pine trees outside. I felt like I was in a cage, even if the bars were made of crystal. The archive and the obsession. That first night, Julian led me to the basement, the archive. It wasn't a library, it was a cathedral of memories. Rows of temperature-controlled glass cases filled with letters, jewelry, and clothing. "These are Isabella's things," Julian said, his back to me. He was stroking a glass case that held a white silk dress, the one she was wearing in the last photo ever taken of her. "The police calls them evidence. I call them my life. I want every letter scanned. Every photo categorized. I want her back in the only way I can have her." "Julian," I whispered, stepping closer. The smell of him, expensive cedarwood and something metallic, like rain on stone, was overwhelming. "This isn't an archive. It's a shrine." He turned slowly. The intensity in his eyes made my breath hitch. He didn't look like a grieving widower. He looked like a man possessed. He stepped into my space, forcing me back against a cold glass case. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Is that a problem, Elara?" he asked, his voice dropping to a seductive rasp. He reached out, his thumb grazing my lower lip. It was a slow, deliberate touch that made my heart hammer against my ribs. I'm just here to do the work," I managed to say. "Good," he whispered, his eyes darkening. "Because I don't like people who ask questions. I like people who listen." The midnight encounter. I couldn't sleep. The house groaned in the wind, and the silence of the woods was too loud. At 2 a.m., I headed to the kitchen for water. I was wearing a silk slip, a vintage piece I'd found in a thrift shop in NYC. It felt like a second skin. I found Julian in the living room, staring at the lake. He was holding a glass of scotch, the amber liquid glowing in the moonlight. He didn't turn when I entered. "You shouldn't walk around this house in the dark, Elara," he said. "I thought I was alone," I replied, standing at the edge of the room. He turned then. His eyes raked over me, lingering on the way the silk clung to my curves. The atmosphere shifted instantly, the air became thick, charged with a raw, electric tension. He set his glass down and walked toward me. Every step was deliberate, a predator stalking its prey. "You aren't alone," he said, stopping inches from me. He reached out, his hand sliding into my hair, pulling my head back so I had to look at him. "You are in my house. Under my protection. Under my rules." "And what are the rules, Julian?" I breathed. He leaned down, his lips ghosting over my ear. "Rule number 1, never go into the north wing. Rule number 2, never lie to me." He kissed the pulse point on my neck, and a jolt of pure, terrifying pleasure shot through me. I knew I should run. I knew the rumors about him were probably true. People said he killed Isabella because she tried to leave. They said he was a monster. But as his hand slid down my back, pulling me flush against him, I realized I didn't want to leave. I wanted to see what was behind the glass. The first secret. The next morning, while Julian was in his office, I began the work. I was scanning a box of letters from Isabella's mother when I found it. It wasn't a letter. It was a journal, hidden in the lining of the box. I opened it to the last entry. The handwriting was frantic, the ink smeared. He isn't what they think. The beauty is the distraction. He's building something in the North Wing. A cage. Not for his memories. For me. If anyone finds this, please. He hasn't let me leave in months. He says if I go, he'll make sure I'm never found. He's coming. I hear him. The entry ended there. My blood turned to ice. I looked at the security camera in the corner of the room. Was he watching? Suddenly, the door to the archive creaked open. I slammed the journal shut and shoved it under a stack of papers. Julian stood there, looking perfect, looking serene. He held a single red rose in his hand. "How is the progress, Elara?" he asked, walking toward me. "Good," I lied, my heart racing. "Just old letters." He stopped at the table, his eyes lingering on the stack of papers where the journal was hidden. He reached out and tucked the rose behind my ear, his fingers lingering on my skin. "Remember rule number 2, Elara," he whispered, his voice cold. "Don't lie to me." He leaned in and kissed me, a hard, possessive kiss that tasted of iron and secrets. I kissed him back, a desperate attempt to hide my fear. But as he pulled away, he smiled. A dark, knowing smile. "I'm going to the North Wing," he said. "Don't follow me." He walked out, locking the archive door from the outside. I was trapped. And then, from the vents above, I heard it. A faint, rhythmic scratching. Like someone, or something, was trying to claw their way out of the walls. The North Wing. The click of the lock felt like a gunshot in the silent archive. Julian was gone, leaving me alone with the ghosts of Isabella's past and the frantic scratching in the vents. My heart was a drum in my ears, echoing the rhythm of the storm that continued to lash against the glass walls of the estate. I looked at the stack of papers where I'd hidden the journal. Isabella's words burned in my mind, "He's building a cage." I wasn't just an archivist anymore. I was a witness. And in a house like this, witnesses didn't have a very long shelf life. I began to pace the narrow aisles of glass cases. Julian thought he had trapped me, but he had underestimated one thing: I had spent my entire career finding things that people wanted to stay hidden. I knew how architects of the elite worked. They never built a room without a back door. I found it behind a display of Isabella's vintage fur coats. A seam in the wood paneling, nearly invisible to the untrained eye. I pressed my weight against it, and with a low, weighted groan, a section of the wall swung inward. It didn't lead to a hallway. It led to a narrow, spiral staircase made of cold, black iron. The smell hit me instantly. It wasn't the cedar and scotch of the upper floors. It was clinical. Sterile. The smell of a hospital or a laboratory. I climbed. The threshold of madness. The staircase ended at a heavy steel door. Unlike the rest of the house, there were no windows here. This was the North Wing, the blind spot of the estate. I pressed the handle, expecting it to be locked, but it swung open with terrifying ease. Julian wanted me to stay away, but he hadn't locked the door. It was an invitation, a test of my loyalty. The North Wing was a hall of mirrors. Literally. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, but they weren't transparent. They were two-way mirrors. I walked down the long, silent corridor, watching my own reflection, pale, disheveled, my silk slip shimmering like oil on water. I reached the end of the hall and stopped. A massive glass chamber sat in the center of a circular room. Inside, it was a perfect recreation of a bedroom. Isabella's bedroom. The bed was made with the same silk sheets I'd seen in the archive. Her perfume, a cloying scent of lilies, was being pumped through the vents. But Isabella wasn't there. Instead, the room was filled with screens. Dozens of them. They weren't playing movies. They were live feeds. From every room in the house. The library. The kitchen. My bedroom. And the archive. I watched the screen for the archive. I saw the empty room, the stack of papers on the desk. And then, I saw Julian. He was standing in the archive, holding the journal I had tried to hide. He wasn't angry. He was stroking the leather cover, a look of profound, terrifying sadness on his face. He looked up at the camera, directly at me, as if he could see me through the glass and steel. I told you not to lie to me, Elara, his voice echoed through the speakers in the north wing. The dark collision. I turned to run, but he was already there. Julian stood in the doorway of the north wing, his silhouette framed by the harsh, white light of the corridor. He looked different here. The fallen angel was gone. In his place was a man who had stripped away the pretense of humanity. He walked toward me, his steps slow and rhythmic. I backed away until I hit the glass of the central chamber. The cold surface bit into my bare shoulders. Did you find what you were looking for? He asked. His voice was a whisper, but it filled the room. You're keeping her here, I gasped, gesturing to the screens. You're obsessed with her. You didn't just lose her, you're trying to recreate her. Julian stopped inches from me. He reached out, his hand wrapping around my throat. It wasn't a choke, it was a caress, firm, possessive, and terrifyingly intimate. He leaned in, pressing his body against mine, pinning me against the glass. Isabella was a masterpiece, he breathed against my lips. But she was flawed. She tried to break the glass. She tried to ruin the perfection I built for her. What did you do to her, Julian? He didn't answer. Instead, he kissed me. It wasn't the kiss of a lover. It was a claim. It was dark, hungry, and tasted of salt and obsession. My mind screamed at me to fight, to scream, to claw at his eyes. But my body, trapped in the electric friction of his touch, betrayed me. The 18+ intensity of the moment was a fever. I found myself gripping his shoulders, my fingers digging into the expensive fabric of his sweater as the terror and desire blurred into a single, agonizing sensation. He pulled back, his eyes dark with a raw, predatory hunger. You think you're different, Elara? You think you're just the archivist? He slid his hand down my side, his touch leaving a trail of fire on my skin. I didn't hire you to find her secrets. I hired you because you have her eyes. You have her spirit. But you are going to be much more compliant. The revelation. He grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the back of the chamber. He pressed his palm against a biometric scanner, and a hidden door slid open. This wasn't a recreation of a bedroom. It was a medical suite. In the center of the room, under a bright surgical light, was a glass tank. It was filled with a clear, shimmering liquid. And inside was Isabella. She wasn't dead. Not exactly. Her body was suspended in the fluid, her skin pale and translucent like fine porcelain. Tubes were connected to her neck and wrists, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic blue light. Her eyes were closed, her long hair floating around her like a dark cloud. She's in stasis, I whispered, the horror finally reaching my throat. You didn't kill her. You preserved her. She wanted to leave me, Elara, Julian said, standing behind me, his hands resting on my waist. I couldn't let her age. I couldn't let the world touch her. So I stopped time for her. She is my eternal archive. He turned me around to face him. His expression was one of pure, unadulterated devotion, and total madness. But a museum needs more than one exhibit, he whispered. He reached for a syringe on the table next to the tank. The liquid inside was the same shimmering blue as the fluid in the tank. Julian, no, I begged, trying to pull away. He caught me, his arms locking around me like iron bands. He pressed the needle against the side of my neck, his lips ghosting over my ear. Don't worry, Elara. You won't be in the tank. Not yet. I want to see you move. I want to see you breathe. But from now on, you will breathe only for me. He plunged the needle in. The world didn't go dark. It went white. A searing, icy cold spread through my veins, paralyzing my limbs even as my heart continued to race. I collapsed into his arms, my head falling back against his shoulder. The last thing I saw before my vision began to fracture was Julian's face. He was smiling, a beautiful, dark smile. Welcome home, Elara, he whispered. And then, from the other side of the glass tank, I saw it. Isabella's eyes. They were open. And they were looking directly at me. The living statues. The world didn't fade, it sharpened. That was the first cruelty of Julian's serum. My muscles felt like they were being poured into a mold of cold lead, but my senses were screaming. I could hear the hum of the stasis tank like a roar in my ears. I could feel the microscopic texture of the silk slip against my skin, every fiber feeling like a needle. Julian held me as I slumped, my head resting in the hollow of his shoulder. He carried me out of the clinical medical suite and back into the lush, suffocating luxury of the master bedroom. He laid me on the bed, a vast sea of charcoal velvet, and stood over me. Do you feel it, Elara? He whispered. He sat on the edge of the mattress, the weight of him tilting my world. The noise of the world is gone. No more deadlines. No more dusty basements. Just the present. Just us. I tried to scream, but my throat was a desert. My eyes were the only part of me that still belonged to me. I tracked him as he leaned down, his face a mask of terrifying tenderness. "You're going to be so much better than she was," he murmured, his fingers tracing the line of my collarbone. Isabella was a dreamer. She always wanted to be somewhere else. But you have the soul of a seeker. You've spent your life looking for the truth. Well, here it is. The intimacy of the cage. The days that followed were a blurred cycle of sapphire light and Julian's touch. The serum didn't keep me paralyzed forever, it was a leash. It made my movements slow, graceful, and physically exhausting. Every step felt like walking through deep water. Julian was everywhere. He fed me. He bathed me in a tub of warm, scented milk, his hands moving over my skin with a reverence that made my skin crawl and burn at the same time. This was the 18-plus reality of my captivity, a raw, unwanted intimacy that blurred the lines between care and violation. He spoke to me as if we were a normal couple, telling me about his childhood, his tech empire, and his vision for a world where beauty never died. "I'm not a monster, Elara," he said one evening, his hand sliding under the heavy silk of the robe he had dressed me in. He pulled me flush against his chest, his heart beating a steady, rhythmic lie against my back. "The world out there is rot. It's decay. People change. They betray. But here, in the archive, we are perfect. We are forever." He kissed the back of my neck, his teeth grazing my skin, and for a split second, the Stockholm Syndrome threatened to take hold. In the isolation of the estate, he was my only son. His touch was the only warmth. But then, I remembered the eyes in the tank. The silent alliance. Julian began to trust my compliance. He allowed me to move through the house, provided he was watching the screens. One afternoon, while he was occupied with a high-stakes board meeting via an encrypted line, I dragged my leaden limbs back to the north wing. I stood before Isabella's tank. The blue light pulsed like a slow, neon heart. Her eyes were closed again, but as I pressed my palm against the glass, they snapped open. They weren't the eyes of a doll. They were the eyes of a woman trapped in a living hell. She couldn't move, her body suspended in the gel, but her pupils dilated as she looked at me. "Isabella," I mouthed against the glass. She couldn't speak, but her eyes moved. A frantic, rhythmic flickering. Up. Down. Left. Right. It was a code. I was an archivist. I knew ancient scripts, dead languages, and ciphers. I watched her eyes. She wasn't just looking at me, she was pointing. Her gaze flickered toward a vent in the corner of the ceiling, then down to a specific tile on the floor near the tank. I knelt, my muscles screaming in protest. I pried at the tile with my fingernails until they bled. Finally, it gave way. Hidden in a waterproof pouch was a small, high-tech device, a prototype jammer. And a note. "The serum has a shelf life. He doesn't know. Every third dose is a placebo because he fears losing the real you. The jammer kills the cameras for 90 seconds. Use it at 3 a.m. The North Wing has an emergency purge. Save yourself. Kill him if you have to." I looked back at Isabella. A single, crystalline tear had escaped her eye, suspended in the blue fluid. She wasn't his archive. She was his prisoner. And she had been waiting for someone like me, someone with the eyes of a seeker. The breaking point. That night, Julian was more intense than usual. He sensed the shift in the air. He brought me a glass of wine, dark, heavy, and smelling of the serum. "You've been quiet today, Elara," he said, standing by the window as the lightning from another Adirondack storm illuminated his sharp profile. "Are you thinking about the glass? Are you thinking about Isabella?" "I'm thinking about you, Julian," I said, my voice finally returning, though it was thin and brittle. He walked over, taking the wine from my hand and setting it aside. He pulled me up from the bed, his grip tightening on my waist. The tension between us was a physical cord, stretched to the point of snapping. "I can see it in your eyes," he whispered, his face inches from mine. "The fire hasn't gone out. You still want to run. You still want to break the world I built for you." "You didn't build a world," I spat. "You built a tomb." He didn't hit me. He did something worse. He kissed me with a violence that was born of pure, unadulterated obsession. He pushed me back onto the bed, his body a heavy weight of charcoal silk and muscle. "Then let it be a tomb for two," he growled. As he leaned down to bury his face in my neck, I felt the jammer in my pocket. It was 2:59 a.m. I reached out, not to push him away, but to pull him closer. My fingers brushed his temple, a mimicry of affection. "I love you, Julian," I lied. "Rule number 2, don't lie to me." He froze. For a second, the predator vanished, and I saw the hollow, broken man underneath. He wanted to believe it so badly that he let his guard down. He closed his eyes, leaning into my touch. I pressed the button on the jammer. The cameras went black. The hum of the house changed. The scratching in the vents, the sound of the emergency purge system, became a roar. Julian's eyes snapped open. He realized the betrayal instantly. "Elara," he hissed, his face twisting into a mask of rage. But I was already moving. I grabbed the heavy crystal Scotch decanter from the nightstand and swung it with every ounce of strength the serum had left me. The final purge. The sound of the crystal decanter shattering against Julian's temple was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. He didn't scream. He just groaned, a low, animal sound, and slumped across my lap. Blood, dark and thick as the Scotch he loved, began to stain the charcoal velvet sheets. I didn't wait to see if he was breathing. The 90-second window Isabella had promised was ticking away in my brain like a time bomb. I rolled out from under him, my legs feeling like they were made of static. The placebo theory was right, the serum was wearing off, replaced by a surge of pure, jagged adrenaline. I grabbed the master keycard from Julian's bedside table and ran. The house was no longer a serene masterpiece of glass. It was a dying beast. Red emergency lights pulsed in the hallways, casting long, rhythmic shadows that looked like grasping fingers. The purge protocol wasn't just a security measure, it was an extinction event. Julian had designed the house so that if he couldn't have his archive, no one could. The air vents were hissing, not with perfume, but with a heavy, colorless gas. Halon. It was designed to extinguish fires by stripping the oxygen from the air. It would extinguish my life just as easily. The choice in the blue light. I reached the north wing. The glass corridor was vibrating. I hammered the master card against the reader of Isabella's chamber. The door hissed open. Isabella was there, her eyes wide, watching the ceiling. The emergency lights made the sapphire fluid look like wine. I found the manual override lever behind her tank. "I'm here," I gasped, the air already feeling thin in my lungs. "I'm getting you out." I pulled the lever. The sound of the fluid draining was a wet, sucking roar. Isabella's body, freed from the buoyancy of the gel, slumped forward against the glass. I scrambled to the top of the tank, reaching in to grab her shoulders. Her skin was unnervingly cold, not like a person, but like a chilled grape. She was slippery, her silk gown heavy with the blue chemicals. As I pulled her out, her head fell onto my shoulder. She was breathing, shallow, wet gasps of air she hadn't tasted in years. "Go," she whispered. Her voice was a ghostly rasp, a sound from the bottom of a well. The north exit, behind the mirror." "We're both going," I hissed, dragging her dead weight across the floor. "No," a voice boomed from the doorway. Julian was there. He was a mess. A gash ran down his face, blood matting his hair and soaking his silk shirt. He was leaning against the doorframe, a heavy service pistol in his hand. He looked broken, bleeding, and more beautiful than any man had a right to be. "Rule number 2, Elara," he choked out, his voice thick with pain and betrayal. "You lied. You said you loved me." "I loved the man I thought you were," I yelled, still dragging Isabella toward the mirrored wall. "The man you built out of glass and lies. The final devotion." Julian raised the gun. His hand was shaking. For the first time, the tech titan, the master of the archive, looked small. "I saved you both," he whispered. "The world is rot. It's disease. I gave you eternity. Why won't you just stay in the glass?" "Because we're human, Julian," I screamed. "We're meant to rot. We're meant to change. We aren't your fucking trophies." He took a step toward us, and then he stumbled. The halon gas was working on him too. He dropped the gun, his knees hitting the white tile. He looked at Isabella, his first love, his first victim, and then at me. "If I can't keep you," he whispered, his eyes filling with a dark, terrifying clarity, "then I'll be the last thing you ever see." He didn't pick up the gun. He reached for the control panel on the wall. "Julian, don't." Isabella rasped, her hand clutching my arm. He slammed his fist into the total lockdown button. The mirrors began to slide. Massive steel shutters crashed down over the glass walls, sealing the north wing into a tomb. The vents opened fully, the roar of the gas now a deafening scream. He crawled toward us, his movements slow and agonizing. He reached out, his hand trembling as it touched the hem of my silk slip. "Elara," he breathed. I looked at him, at the monster who had bathed me, who had worshipped me, who had tried to steal my soul. And in that moment, under the red lights and the dying air, I felt a sick, twisted pang of grief. He was a monster, but he was my monster. I leaned down and kissed him. A final, dark sacrament. I tasted the copper of his blood and the salt of my own tears. "Goodbye, Julian," I whispered. I grabbed the jammer from my pocket, the one Isabella had hidden. I didn't use it to kill the cameras. I jammed it into the gears of the emergency shutter behind the mirror. Crunch. The steel plate stalled, leaving a 2-foot gap at the bottom. Go. I shoved Isabella through the gap. She rolled into the dark woods outside, the cold Adirondack air hit her skin for the first time in years. I looked back at Julian. He was lying on the floor, his eyes closing, a peaceful smile on his face. He thought he was dying with me. He thought the archive was complete. I slid through the gap just as the gear snapped and the shutter slammed shut with the force of a guillotine. The aftermath. I dragged Isabella through the snow and the pines until we reached the road. I didn't look back until the first explosion rocked the earth. Julian's purge ended with a thermal spike. The house, the glass, the steel, the archive, didn't just lock down, it self-destructed. A pillar of orange flame punched through the canopy of the trees, lighting up the lake like a second sun. Everything was gone. Isabella's letters. Her dresses. Julian. The man who loved us to death was now nothing but ash and stardust. Isabella and I sat on the shoulder of the highway as the first sirens began to wail in the distance. She was shivering, wrapped in my damp robe, her eyes fixed on the fire. "He's gone," she whispered. "He is," I said. I looked at my hands. They were pale, the blue tint of the serum finally fading into the natural pink of a living woman. We told the police a version of the truth. We told them about the kidnapping, the serum, the madness. They found the remains of the medical suite in the rubble. Julian's death was ruled a suicide murder attempt. The final secret. 6 months later. I live in a small apartment in Seattle. Isabella is in a specialized rehab center in California, learning how to walk and talk again. We don't speak often. The bond we share is too dark, too heavy with the smell of lilies and sapphire light. I was cleaning my desk yesterday when I found a small, padded envelope in my mail. No return address. Inside was a thumb drive. I plugged it in. A single file appeared. Archive_final. I clicked play. It was a video. Julian. He was sitting in the archive the night before I arrived. He looked directly at the camera. "Elara," he said. His voice was calm, almost hypnotic. "If you're watching this, it means you broke the glass. It means you were exactly who I thought you were. The seeker. The one who wouldn't be contained." He leaned forward, his gray eyes piercing the screen. "I didn't hire you to organize my past, Elara. I hired you to be my future. I knew you'd kill me. I knew you'd burn the house down. That was the plan. Because now, you'll never forget me. Every time you close your eyes, you'll feel the silver in your veins. Every time a man touches you, you'll compare him to me." He smiled, the same dark, knowing smile that had haunted my dreams. "I'm not in the archive anymore, Elara. I'm in you." The screen went black. I looked in the mirror. My eyes, the eyes he said were Isabella's, the eyes he worshipped, flickered. Just for a second, I saw a flash of sapphire blue in the pupils. I reached for a glass of water, and my hand was steady. Too steady. I didn't feel fear. I felt powerful. Julian was dead. But the archive was open. And I was the only one left to curate the remains. Julian Blackwood is gone, but that final video. I'm in you. Do you think Elara is truly free, or did the serum change her forever? Let me know your theories in the comments, I read every single one. If you love these high-intensity, dark stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button to join the Backseat Redditor. See you in the next one.